Nothing ever lasts forever. Every great civilization falls. Every ideology will die. Gods will be forgotten and names lost to history. But Resident Evil, just like the T-Virus, doesn't die. Because it mutates. Quality-wise, Resident Evil was at a weird spot in the early 2000s. It's not like the games were selling well, neither were they badly reviewed, even though some of them deserved it. But Capcom had been struggling to make the games interesting ever since Resident Evil 3. There had been a clear emphasis on combat that only increased with each entry, which is even reflected on the game's opening cutscenes. Compare Resident Evil 2 to Code Veronica. The characters were also starting to be presented as action heroes, so the shift towards combat was apparent. Resident Evil 4 came at a time where the power of the current generations could offer cutscenes that, instead of looking like this, could look like this. The industry was rapidly changing, and the classic Resident Evil slow gameplay wasn't shining as bright as it did in 32 bits, especially with how many Resident Evil clones were out there at the time. Even Capcom was guilty of adding to that pile with games like Dino Crisis and Onimusha. Resident Evil 4 had an extremely long development time, we're talking 6 years, starting out in 1999 and finally releasing in 2005. This game went from featuring zombies and Leon exploring the Spencer estate to having Leon fight parasite-controlled ganados in Spain. Famously, one of the early prototypes ended up becoming Devil May Cry. Games with this sort of development history don't have happy endings. Games with extremely long development time, with drastic changes to the story and gameplay mid-development. When games have such trouble development, it usually shows in the final product. However, be it because of Shinji Mikami's experience as a director, be it because of the new setting which allowed for more creative freedom, be it because of any reason really, Resident Evil 4 was released in January 11th, 2005, and it would set a trend for how video games could look and play for the next 20 years. Starting out Resident Evil 4 for the first time is a really interesting experience even nowadays. Yes, the new camera angle is immediately noticeable, but what surprised me the most is what didn't change. Resident Evil 4 gives you the same tank controls you've come to expect from the earlier games, the only difference being the new over-the-shoulder camera. I distinctly remember thinking that if they didn't change the controls, why even bother changing the perspective? That was for the first 5 minutes. It wasn't long before I realized how wrong I was, because this control scheme is pretty fantastic. Not in spite of its limitations, but as a direct result of them. This will come into play later, but if the controls were quote-unquote better and more in line with modern games, I sincerely believe the game would be worse. Allow me to explain. Tank controls are the name of the game here, and it's a pretty interesting control scheme, because it's very similar to the fixed camera entries while also being completely different. Pushing forward and the stick moves you forward, left and right turn you in their respective direction, and down makes you walk backwards. In the early games, the tank controls made the changing camera angles manageable. As long as you're pressing up on that D-pad, your character will move forward to wherever they're facing. Later games would add more modern control schemes, and while that did make them snappier to control, it also added some clunkiness when changing camera angles. What makes the tank controls in the PS1 games work is that they worked in tandem with the level design. Additionally, not being able to easily change directions made enemy encounters more nerve-inducing, because turning around took some time, which could make the difference between life and death. Now, Resident Evil 4, with the over-the-shoulder camera, having tank controls may seem outdated. After all, there's no change in camera angles, and you can control where you're looking at anyway. Doesn't this just make the game more obtuse and harder? Yes. While this is a much more action-focused experience, there are still elements of survival in it. Even when there's so many more enemies you find in this game at the same time compared to, say, Resident Evil 2 or 3, the game is still not much harder than those, because this time your relationship with your weapons has changed. While in the classic series the point was to explore the map and your weapons were your means of keeping you alive, in Resident Evil 4 combat is the point, and your weapons will be your new best friends and the focus of the game.
I'm gonna fuck you up.
Combat was always part of the series. Every single game has you firing weapons at enemies and fighting bosses. However, one might argue that the combat wasn't even that good, or even meant to be. The combat in classic Resident Evil works best as a reward for your previous actions, and how well prepared you were for each encounter. The better you were at managing your items, the easier and shorter your encounters would be. For example, if you saved your magnum rounds, which can one-shot normal enemies, you may have a harder time traversing the map, but when you get to a boss, it'll be way easier and faster to deal with them, which in turn helps you preserve health and healing items, meaning your playthrough may be smoother. But the actual gameplay during combat wasn't ever really the point. Yes, you could position yourself better and dodge some attacks, but most of your combat encounters were basically running away, aiming and shooting, and for most of the games aiming was automatic anyway, meaning the way you engage with ammo was different from a shooter. Most of the time you could count on your shots hitting the enemies because of the auto-aim, meaning after a while you could make a pretty good guess about how many shots you'd need to defeat a certain number of enemies. Unlike a typical first-person shooter, where for preserving ammo was a direct consequence of how good your aim was. In classic Resident Evil, preserving ammo was not only about choosing when to shoot, but most importantly, about choosing when not to shoot. A lot of the times, it's better to not bother shooting certain enemies. Maybe they were in an area where you could easily dodge them, and as such don't present much of a threat. Or maybe they were somewhere you knew you wouldn't need to return to anyway. Adding to that, most enemies didn't drop any items, let alone more ammo, so you needed to be sure it was worth it to use your very limited resources on that enemy. This is combat in Resident Evil 3.
Get away from me!
This is combat in Resident Evil 4.
Taste my American might, you worthless European peasants!
Resident Evil 4 throws all that out the window and dives head-on into being an action horror experience, while at the same time being faithful to the roots of the series. Running away and positioning yourself is still a big part of it, but whereas in the old games, after positioning yourself, it was a matter of choosing ammo, shooting and waiting for the enemy to go down, now essentially the game becomes a sort of arcade shooter, where you have to prevent the enemies from approaching you by either killing them or stunning them to then kill them. Something that is a big point of conversation surrounding the combat in this game is the aiming. Using a normal controller, the aiming is slow and more methodical. It is hard to aim at smaller targets, like heads or dynamite. Most of the time you'll be making small corrections to actually hit your enemies, thanks to the way the aiming accelerates. And yes, while it's not the most intuitive aiming system, it serves to balance out the game. Making it more likely you'll miss some of your shots adds tension. When you have hordes of ganados approaching you, it makes each headshot way more satisfying. Just compare how less threatening the enemies are when I use a mouse to aim, and while it can also be fun using the snappier aiming, especially for the Mercenaries, I firmly believe that if the aiming was better, the game would be worse. While in earlier games each encounter was a decision, the only decision here is which weapon and where to shoot. And to that, there are different ways you can kill an enemy now. Yeah, old-fashioned shoot them till they stop moving works, but you can also execute finishing moves on stunned enemies. Either flash grenade or shoot them in the head or below the knees, and you get to execute one of two finishing moves, which can also knock back surrounding enemies, which in this game are relentless. Congratulations, Leon Scott Kennedy, you endured barely scraping by in a deserted police station and crawling through sewers. Now you get to suplex, air kick, and style on all these parasite-infected Spaniards.
Resident Evil.
Zombies are no more. Now introducing the Ganados. Funnily enough, until late 2003, the game featured zombies as enemies like any other game in the series. But now we have the Ganados, human beings not infected with a virus, but with a parasite that makes them part of a hive mind. Not being rotting corpses, they are smarter and more resourceful, being able to use weapons, ladders, open doors, and operate machinery. Being capable of speech, their dialogue gives an insight on their cultist beliefs and isolated lifestyle, constantly calling you forastero, meaning foreigner in Spanish. When you get to the Salazar Palace, you can hear the fanáticos repeat, morir es vivir, dying is living, quiero matar, I want to kill. Cheesy, I know, but they clearly have a fascination and some sick worshipping of not death, but the act of dying. Their human sacrificing, the way they seem to keep doing their daily chores but clearly have no regard for hygiene or sense of self-preservation, the Ganados are not just as good as the zombies. They are bounds and leagues better in every way, and a perfect fit for the new gameplay style. While zombies could only walk in a straight line and grab you, they were an effective threat with the limited movement and cramped spaces of the early games, especially when caught off guard by them. But now, the spaces are bigger, and a lot of the time is more open, and with your new maneuverabilities, the old zombies would have been a joke. The Ganados are fast and follow you wherever you go. You're not running away this time. You have to face them. If you try and keep distance with them, they'll run towards you. Some of them will even carry bowguns or dynamite for ranged attacks, shields which protect from most attacks and will require a shotgun blast to break instantly, melee weapons ranging from pitchforks to chainsaws that will instantly behead you if you don't manage to keep them away. Sometimes after landing a headshot on an enemy, a parasite will sprout from their neck. Sometimes it's essentially just a second head, but some of them can sprout a bladed tentacle, which enhances their attack range, or even a spider like Blaga with acid spit. The further you get into the game, the more common occurrences will be, adding to the tension of the game, because just when you think you've defeated an enemy, he might just come back stronger. But worry not, because while the enemies get stronger as you advance on your mission, you will get stronger too.
Okay, I have only one very important question. You got a smoke?
Is Resident Evil 1 a Metroidvania? No, but it is a game in which you need to explore a place and progressively gain access to new parts of it by collecting items. Later games would streamline design while still emphasizing exploration, 3 being the most aggressive about it. If you compare the maps from each game, you can see an increase of linearity. At the same time, there was an increase in action set pieces. Resident Evil 4 takes it to its natural evolution, because you don't explore the map as much as you make your way through it. Instead of puzzles, now it's more of an obstacle course. You make your way from one area to the next in a linear fashion. Variety is achieved by the action set pieces this time. Even when you're facing the same enemies, you might be on top of a giant bulldozer, or inside a minecart where there is nowhere to run and you have to act fast before getting overwhelmed. Maybe you're trapped in a cage and need to break out, or maybe you need to protect Ashley from getting abducted. Yeah, Ashley, I did not forget about her. She is the whole point of this mission. Leon was sent to rescue her by the US government because she's the president's daughter. When you finally get to her, she'll follow you around and you'll have to keep her alive. You can order her to either follow you or stay put, and that's it. Aside from the occasional set piece where she can help you get around or when she activates a mechanism, she doesn't do much of anything. The only resources you need to use for her are health items in case she gets hurt, so no sharing ammo, no sharing weapons, no nothing. You only need to worry about keeping her alive. Man, imagine if you had to control each character separately at the same time and had to deal with 2 inventories. That would be terrible. Although you do play a small section as Ashley, you have no weapons and you can only run away from enemies here. Funnily enough, the original Japanese version used the classic fixed camera perspective here. That was scrapped in favor of the new over-the-shoulder perspective in subsequent releases. But yeah, I don't actually mind Ashley that much. She's pretty manageable, and I enjoy the challenge of protecting her. Something that really adds to me not being annoyed by her is that you don't have to protect her for the entire game, because fortunately, she gets kidnapped a lot, meaning I get a lot of me time, meaning having to actually take care of her was more of a switching things up rather than a constant annoying gimmick that adds nothing to the game. Ashley may be a part of the gameplay and the inciting incident for Leon, but she doesn't have a lot of agency in the story. She's merely along for the ride. And the story in Resident Evil 4 isn't that important. Heck, it was written in 3 weeks and super late into development. It is barely connected to the early games, only connections really being the returning characters and the plot to bring Umbrella back. But that's more of an Ada story in separate ways. The general gist of it is, there's this cult called the Illuminados, which are infected by a parasite that makes them all part of a hive mind controlled by this guy. Leon and Ashley get infected and have to figure out how to remove the parasite from their bodies. You meet a short Napoleon-looking guy, Ada tries to kill you but helps you out, Ashley gets abducted a couple times, the best character in gaming, Louis, dies, Leon almost succumbs to the infection and is even mind-controlled for a bit. They use a conveniently placed parasite removing machine to free themselves and finally kill the cult leader and escape an exploding island on a jet ski. All's well that ends well. Point is, the story's fine, incredibly goofy and very reminiscent of an action espionage movie, with some conspiracy to overthrow the United States thrown in. Separate Ways elaborates with some character backstory and explains what the hell Ada was doing there and why she helps Leon out. The only thing that sticks out about the story is how Leon acts. He's nothing like the man we saw in Resident Evil 2 Surviving Raccoon City. Yes, some time has passed and he's not that rookie cop anymore, but it doesn't feel like Raccoon City changed him. More so, he's just a silly action hero who throws one-liners and does cool action hero stuff now, which is fine. It's definitely entertaining, but his investment in this mission isn't very compelling because he has no personal stakes here, which is alleviated when he starts showing that he cares for Ashley, I suppose. But it is also weird how facing the possibility of Umbrella returning doesn't seem to affect him. He's just there taking names and kicking ass, which is all he needs to do here, I suppose. But the campaign is not the only mode in this game. Yes, there's a side in Ada and Separate Ways as I mentioned, but returning from Resident Evil 3, Mercenaries makes its triumphant comeback. Let me put it this way, while I didn't care for Mercenaries in Resident Evil 3, in Resident Evil 4 Mercenaries is the main reason I kept playing. In this mode you plunge into one of 4 confined areas. Your objective, kill or be killed. Rules are simple, kill enemies, score points, chain combos, collect clocks to extend your time and get even more kills, rinse and repeat. You get a 5-star ranking after you get a score of 60,000 or more. And when you get a 5-star ranking for the first time, you unlock a new character, one for each stage. The characters in this game mode are, of course, Leon Kennedy wielding his blacktail and riot gun, Ada Wong equipped with the Punisher handgun, the reliable TMP, and the semi-automatic rifle. Jack Krauser has only his bow and arrow, but the arrows are insanely strong, being an instant kill if you land a headshot. And
Hug, baby! It's hug time, everybody! Oh yeah, look at him go, it's fucking amazing, look at the way he uses his TMP. Oh, the neck snapping, the mighty kick. Hug is not only the best character in this game, but the greatest character ever created in all of media. Hug is my battery, my reason to keep on living, my inspiration, and my religion. Hug!
Wesker carries the Killer 7, a silenced handgun, and the semi-automatic rifle. Very powerful weapons. He also has the strongest finisher attacks in the game, but he gets very little item drops, making him the riskiest character to play as. In this game mode, learning the layout is key. Clocks and items spawn in the same location every time, so you have an incentive to strategize your routes and decide how to approach enemies, which are infinitely spawning. But in some maps, there are deliberately placed enemies you'll have to deal with every round. There's also rarer, stronger enemies exclusive to each map, this being the Chainsaw Sisters, the Garrator, the Gatling Man, and the Giant Chainsaw Man. Every time they spawn, they take priority because they have the ability to instantly destroy you. Special shout out to the Giant Chainsaw Man, the real final boss of the game. The game will end with either you dying or the timer running out. Only when you survive will your score count though. So yeah, that's Resident Evil 4 for you. You may have noticed that this game looks a little too good, and that's because I used the truly incredible RE4HD project, which not only adds enhanced textures but also lighting, 3D models, and even field of view, which is why my footage manages to look this good. Some might say that I didn't have the most authentic experience. Now, all said and done, you don't need me to tell you that Resident Evil 4 is not only a fantastic game, but also one of the most important games ever made. Very few titles have impacted the gaming industry in a similar way. Is Resident Evil 4 a worthy successor and a natural evolution of the classic formula? Well, yes and no. It is more than a worthy successor as a game, but like I said, there's some issues with the tone and characters, and it strays too far from even trying to be a horror game. There's only one section of the game that even seems like it tries to be scary, and wouldn't you know, it's a remnant of earlier versions of the game. But even despite of that, Resident Evil 4 manages to be so far the most polished and fun Resident Evil experience at the time of its release. So yes, Resident Evil 4 is deserving of its reputation. Now, should you, watching this right now, stop everything you're doing and go play this 20-year-old game? I don't know, I'm not your dad.